I'm here right now with Danielle, who is a female friendship coach and an educator who speaks on the subject of friendship. And I'm so excited to have you here with me. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. I'm really glad that you brought me on to lend my voice to this conversation because it's so important.
Well, for sure. You've dedicated your work to helping women create and maintain better female friendships. Why did you feel like there was a job and this need in the first place? I'm so curious about all of this.
Yeah, it's so funny because whenever I tell people what I do, I just kind of sit back and watch because they're either like, oh, a friendship coach, that's adorable. Like people don't know what to make of it. And so I always say, it's not like I was, 8 years old with friendship coach on my vision board. It definitely wasn't a thing. But I actually started as a high school English teacher. So for 6 years, I was working with juniors and seniors, and I saw the girls and they would struggle. They'd come to me between classes or after school with their issue. And so after 6 years in the classroom, I went into public relations and I'm like, okay, I'm probably leaving that teenage drama behind because I'm working with these like charismatic, high achieving businesswomen. And then, as you know, even there, they're struggling with maintaining friendships because they're so career focused, whatever it is. So one night I came home, I went on Amazon and out of curiosity, I just searched like friendship books. And at the time, there were very few results. And at the ones that came up, they were for children. And I thought, this is what we think of friendship. That surely it's something a kid would need help with, but not an adult. And so then I Googled friendship coach and it like was not a thing. And I just like leaned into it. I already have my background in education. I got certified to coach. And now I spend hours a week studying research around female conflict and communication and cooperation and all these things to help us understand how can I better relate to other women and experience more depth in the friendships that I have. And it's been about 4 years. It's become a whole thing and it's a blessing to serve women in this space.
Well, I love to hear about your education background and just how that's evolved as you've seen people over time. Because also, as we grow up, we evolve, even though we may not like to admit that, that does happen in our lives. Say, you have a client who is nearly starting from scratch almost with female friendships. What would the beginning process look like for them to start finding some really solid friendships?
Oh, that's a great question. And I'm so glad you asked it because, as you can imagine, hands down, that is the number one question. It's always, how do I make friends? But it typically comes with some kind of qualifier. So it's like, how do I make friends as a woman with social anxiety? How do I make friends as a woman in a new city? How do I make friends? So I hope it shows us that we'll always be making new friends. And so the first step is more of a mindset and is to shake off any shame you have about having to start from scratch, that it's not something you should have figured out by now. You're not behind. There's not something wrong with you if you look around and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't have people." And in fact, research tells us that on average we replace about half of our friends every 7 years. And so you might be in a season where you're like, "Oh gosh, I'm in a pruning season and I have space to invite new connections." So the first step is to shake off the shame. The second thing I tell you is to look at the people who are already in your life, because research also tells us that a lot of the friends we have are also serving in some kind of other role. So they might also be your cousin, they might also be your hairstylist, they might also be your coworker. So if that's the case, look around at who already exists and you dismiss them for whatever reason as a potential friend. And what would happen if you like looked at them in like a new way, is the first thing. Then I like to say, become a regular somewhere, because that familiarity makes it more comfortable for us to start a friendship. And so, especially those of us who are working from home, a lot of us are in the house all day. We don't get out and about. Maybe you can commit to like working from a coffee shop every Friday at the same time or walking your dog at like the same time, every day. And I'll pause here because I know some women are like, we can't have routines. We have to be careful. And I heard as a safety precaution, and that's true. So, adapt this to fit your lifestyle. But how can you become a regular somewhere? How can you kind of breed familiarity with the people who work there and the other people who come there every Friday morning to work out of their house too? So breeding that familiarity. And then the last tip I'll give, because I can do this all day, but the last one I'll give that's very accessible is to make your desire known. And so use social media to say, oh, yeah, I'm moving to Austin and just looking to see if anybody has any recommendations, or text a friend or an acquaintance who's like a super extrovert and just say, hey, I'm just trying to get more plugged in. And I thought of you because you're always out and about and doing some cool stuff. Is there anything around town worth checking out? Because they're either going to give you recommendations or they're going to invite you to be their plus one. They might say, oh my God, yes, we do happy hour every Tuesday. You have to come. But no one's going to be able to meet your need for new connections if you're too embarrassed to let people know that you want new connections.
I feel like that first step is so important because if you just live in that shame, you're never going to do any of the other steps. You're just going to sit there and say, I'm too embarrassed to try this. So I'm just going to be alone forever.
Exactly.
And there's finding friends, and there's also finding friends who lift you up, add to your life, empower you. They're what I like to call my deep connections versus my surface level friends. How do we ensure that we can find and cultivate those kind of friendships that are empowering more than they are surface level?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that because sometimes the conversation does become about like finding new people, which is so great. And you need to have that skill. But then sometimes I'm like, well, how are you going deep with the friends you already have? Like, how can you make that more meaningful? Right. Because some of us feel a sense of loneliness because all our friendships are superficial. And so I'm so glad you asked about that. In terms of creating more depth, the first thing I would say is look at how vulnerable you're being. And I know vulnerability is like a hot topic, but I do want to correct one misconception. I think people think vulnerability means, let me tell you about my biggest trauma. Let me tell you about this big thing and self disclose. The best way I've heard vulnerability defined is you are willing to take a risk of rejection. And so I'm going to tell you something. Oh, I know I might look weak. I might look weird. I might look, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because research shows that we tend to like people who are vulnerable with us. It kind of humanizes them. It's kind of endearing. It's like, okay, there's something about that. And so open up a little bit appropriately, right? Especially in the beginning to go a little bit deeper. Also, try to take your relationships off autopilot. Sometimes with the same friends, we do the same things. We do the same happy hour at the same place. Like, it's okay. The same way in a romantic relationship where it feels kind of dry, you're like, we need to jazz this up. Same thing. Maybe you're on default with your friends. Can you infuse new life by, you know, operating on a different social backdrop or trying something totally out of the box together? Because those shared experiences genuinely do really connect you. And then the final thing I'll say, and this is going to sound so from left field, but ask your friends for help. It is the number one thing I've seen women are scared to do. So I recently asked them, which of the following phrases is most difficult for you to say? I'm sorry, I love you, or I need help. And hands down, women were saying, it's hard for me to be like, can you help me? And so research shows we're closer to people after they help us. If a friendship is about give and take, but we just want to give and we're like, oh, I don't want to take, I don't want to impose, I don't want to inconvenience her, I don't want to, then you're not reaping the full benefits of friendship. And so if you want a little more depth, whatever a secret need is right now, I challenge you to communicate to that to your friends and then watch how that instantly deepens your connection.
It's funny that you say that because I was absolutely that person for so long. I'm so about giving and I will give all my energy to the outside world in any possible way I can. But when it came to people helping me, I refused it and I didn't want it in all aspects of my life. And I've gotten better about doing that. So I love that you bring that up and encourage people to do that because it's something that we need to encourage more often. So definitely love that. On the flip side of things, I want to know, when do you think it's time to maybe give up on a friendship?
Mm. Yeah, I'm always like advocating for like, no, you can repair this, talk through it. And women's friendships can be very fragile. Not that they're not deep, they're fragile. But at the end of the day, sometimes it doesn't work. And you've tried and you love her, but you realize like, oh my God, I don't think I can put the energy into like sustain this anymore. I don't think this is good for me. And that's okay, because that's just what it is. So if you're in a place where you're like, I think I need to let go, the first thing is to get really clear about what you want to do, because we ruminate a lot and we're like talking to other friends. I don't know if I should let her go. We're telling our boyfriend, and research shows that you're more likely to have health issues when you have ambivalent friendships. So it does more damage to you to almost have friendships that you're undecided about as opposed to having no friendships at all, which is kind of like, wow, right? So first you
Mhm.
got to make up your mind. Are we doing this or not? And then let's get moving. So if you decide it's time to let go, I want you to take a couple things into consideration. One, do not ghost. Do not ghost her. I know it's tempting. Sometimes we tell ourselves, I don't want to hurt her feelings or make her feel awkward. So I'm just going to stop talking to her. And I have seen that leaves a lot of damage for women moving forward. I know it's uncomfortable, but depending on why y'all are breaking up, you have to have a conversation, especially if she expects you two to still be hanging out. Now, if you two do a gradual friendship fade, that happens all the time where we both kind of agree, and we call a little less, and that's one thing, but that means both people are on board. As soon as you've determined in your mind you don't want to do this anymore, but she's under the impression that you guys are still going strong, we need to have some kind of conversation to make sure everybody's on the same page for her dignity too. I mean, we don't want her out here looking foolish thinking we're cool, but we don't enjoy her company. It's not fair to her. So it's actually an act of generosity to let a friend go who you're not invested in anymore for her sake. You wouldn't want that, you know? And so in terms of how to have that conversation, all I can say, because I can give you scripts, but I want you to be careful about telling her about how she's not good enough. I just think you're too this. I think you're too that. And you need to focus on what it is you need. This is less about her inadequacies and it's more about you pursuing what you want. So instead of saying, I just feel like you're just too negative, you're just, I don't know, it's like a toxic energy. I can't do that, which is really hard to hear and makes people defensive. Instead, I'll say, you know what? I've been giving this a lot of thought, and the last thing I want to do is hurt your feelings. But I've been really thinking about this, and I think that it's best that I prioritize some spaces where I feel a little different, or I feel a little freer, or prioritize spaces that, make me feel whatever it is. But I want to prioritize XYZ. And so I don't think I can keep this friendship up the way that I have been, and they can gather from that what they will. But now I've made it about me instead of you not being good enough. And so I think if we do that, yes, it's awkward. Yeah, she might get mad, but at least she's got to respect you were direct. And now she can go and live her life with more clarity and with friends who appreciate what she has to give.
I think those are very important tools to hear. Whenever I've found myself in situations where the friendships weren't co beneficial, I felt like they were draining all of my energy. That's when I would kind of move them to a surface level, that
Yeah.
category for me. And then I would hone in more on the other friendships that were really feeding into me. And that seemed to help with the transition easier too,
Hmm.
because it did allow for that kind of gradual, okay, this just wasn't working situation. If you're really afraid of those conversations, I'm not sure if that's the best tool. If it's a really toxic one, you probably got to have that conversation. But it could be a good tool if you have someone who just isn't your kind of person. Friendships and love work in similar ways that if they're not your person, sometimes you just kind of have to take a few steps back. You still love them from afar and you're still supportive and encourage them, but you can't give all your energy. Is that a safe thing to say?
I so appreciate you saying that. Yes. Okay. So let me clarify. The little script and stuff that I gave is for there's some kind of circumstances where it does need a clean termination, whether she's really hurt you and you can't do it anymore, or whether you don't want to modify the friendship. You don't know how to. So you know that the only thing you can do is like totally tear away. So that's for that. But I do always advise, I'm so glad you said that. I think that's a great strategy, what you just said. Maybe I recategorize her in my mind. Maybe I expect a little less. Maybe I decrease the frequency. Sometimes we realize that we can enjoy friends in like smaller doses. And we're like, I love her, but I'm realizing when we hang out once a month, that is good enough for me. I can't do the weekly check ins. It's a lot. So sometimes she's the perfect friend for you as like a 3 hours a month friend. So
Yeah.
I encourage you, yes, I love that you said that, to experiment with what it can look like. And maybe that feels good, as opposed to thinking the options are keep her on full blast or totally cut her off. So that's beautiful. And I love that strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it took me a long time to get there, so I'm glad it's a good one that I can keep leaning on. Is there any reason or scientific research, I suppose, that explains why it's so difficult for us, especially as adults, to make good friends?
Yeah. So there is research, and I also have my theories. It's a couple things. One, ironically, we feel like we know ourselves so well. So we're like, I know I'm an introvert. I know myself, or I don't get along with those kind of people. I know what I like. And sometimes we get stuck because we're so convinced that as a grown adult, I know what I like. So we take fewer risks. So we're less open minded. We're less curious about people when we do meet them. I'm going to use the word stereotype a little bit, but we kind of do. Like, oh, she seems shy, or like, oh, she's, a lot older than me. Like, we couldn't be friends. So we do a lot of like categorizing people immediately because we know, and our brain's been trained autopilot. But if we got a little more curious, I think we'd instantly become more aware of just how much opportunity is out there if we were curious like a child, instead of so like, oh, yeah, I have her figured out. I know her type. I don't get along with women like
Mhm.
that. Okay. The second thing is the fear of rejection. We never outgrow that. Everybody wants to like feel confident you're going to be accepted or your idea is going to sound smart. So we're scared of that. And because we're scared of that and we feel like we've had experience of rejection and we don't want to do that again, we initiate a little less. We wave to strangers a little less. We start conversations a little less. We are less likely to text a girl who seems kind of cool and be like, hey, yeah, I would love to hang out sometime. Like, because we're scared that this person's going to be like, you're awful. I can't believe you asked me. Get out of here. Which the average person is not doing that. Some of us are introverted or shy. I know those are two different things. And so we might, get out there a little bit less. And then the last thing I'll say too, or two last things is a lack of time. We've got other priorities. We got work, we got kids, we got the dogs, we got vacations, and so we tend to put friendship in the margins of our lives. Like, I'll get to that when I have time for that stuff. But we need to start talking about friendship more from a wellness perspective, not just a fun thing to do sometimes, but something that's like, oh my gosh, like I need friends, like for my physical, mental, emotional health. I got to prioritize this. And so the time thing I think gets in the way. And then finally, a lot of us believe the lie that it's too late for me. I should have already made my friends. I'm 40. It's too late. And that is not true. So just remember, the moment you say it's too late for me, you just signed yourself up for what? Another 40 years of friendlessness, So it can start anytime. You just have to stay curious. You have to be bold about initiating and realize like how vast the friendship landscape really is.
I love that you said wellness as a way of looking at friendships. I've never heard anyone say it like that before, but I don't know what I would do without the support system of my girlfriends behind me.
Mm.
They have changed my life in so many ways. So I love hearing that perspective.
And it's good. I love that you have lived experience to be like, oh my gosh, that is true. I need my squad.
Yes, 100%. What is something you would tell there's a lot of young women out there, we're both very young, but younger than us, maybe in high school and around that age, who are in the midst of starting to create some lifelong friendships. What's something that you would tell them that you wish we all knew at their age?
Oh, yeah. So many things. But the first thing I'll say, or the main thing I'll say is this, and it's gonna sound so corny, but I wouldn't say it if it weren't like Bible, like the truth, okay? We are so concerned sometimes about finding the right friends and friends who are good to us. And we want to know 8 signs that she's a narcissist and she's toxic. And we're like, and I always say it makes me sad because I think so many of us have been hurt that we're now protecting ourselves when we go out. We want assurance that, okay, is she good? Is she bad? Is she good for me? You have to find a way to be a good, confident friend. And you will attract the healthy friendships you're looking for. That's the trick. That's the key. You need to be warm and inviting and look people in the eyes and in the face and smile when you go out places. You need to find that girl who looks like she's kind of like on the fringes and say hello. You need to pursue that girl who seems kind of cool, like in your classes, but you're like, ah, she's probably too cool for me. Go say hello. And she might reject you because the more you put yourself out there, like mathematically, you're probably going to get more rejection. But being confident in yourself to know that's not about me. Like there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not less lovable or interesting or funny if this girl does not want to engage with me. It has nothing to do with me. And so people are surprised to know there's a list of like 10 traits that make a good friend that psychologists who are friendship experts have like designed. And people are surprised to know two of the traits that are on that list. Some of those traits you would expect: somebody reliable, trustworthy, fun. Two that surprise people are: one, a willingness to trust. because it's hard to be friends with somebody who's waiting for you to screw them over. They don't open up, they're cynical. Okay. And the second one is self confidence. So you have to know that you have something worthy to offer. You have something that other women would probably really love and appreciate. But if you're walking around here hunched over and scared because secretly you don't think you have anything to offer, secretly you think you're going to be exposed as a fraud and all your messiness, you know, that's going to keep you isolated in a hole. So as soon as you can find a way to make other people belong, be warm, and believe you have something worthy to offer, you will attract the kind of friendships that you've been dreaming of.
I love that you touched on that because that was gonna be my last question about, we talk about making all these other friends and what they're like, but it's so important for us to ensure that we can also be a good friend in return when we find them. So,
Mhm.
I love that you mentioned that and made sure that it's not just about the person on the other end, it's also about what's going on inside of you.
It really is. It's so surprising sometimes to figure out, like, oh my gosh, like how much of your personal stuff you bring to your friendships because it's not just about having fun. So let's say you do make friends with somebody, but you're not self-assured. You might tolerate mistreatment. You might tolerate because you're not sure. You think like, well, I guess this it's better than having no friends. So I'll, you know what I mean? So being confident helps you have healthy friendships when you're in them. You won't tolerate mistreatment. You'll be more willing to be like generous and be a giver without wondering like, oh, well, how will that make me look? And I don't want to be taken advantage of it. You just like operate from a place of just confidence. You go for it, you know? So if you want to have fun and a good time and secure relationships, you do have to really like believe that you're worthy. So I think if I knew that younger and I wasn't in a place of insecurity, sometimes people are surprised to know that I wasn't the nicest girl in high school. Like I thank God that he like changed my heart and he humbled me through life. And now it's like I have a whole new brain, but it was a place for insecurity, not wanting my friends to leave me for other friends. And so you're kind of exclusive with your group and you don't let in that girl who wants to be in. But I was insecure. I didn't think I had anything to offer. And so if this other girl comes, what if she takes my spot? Just silliness like that because I wasn't sure about myself, or doing little things to fit in because I wasn't sure about myself. And so I think the sooner girls can get that lesson that you have something to offer, I think eventually we'll all be better for it.
Yes. Oh, such an important message. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your expertise on all of this. As much as we like to say we have it all figured out, we don't. And it's really good to have tools to keep figuring it out. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for creating a space for us to have this conversation. It's so important.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love for you to shout out where the people can find you, where they can hear you. I know you're also working on a special project. So if you want to give any details about that too.
Yes, it's so cool. I had a last year, somebody randomly commented on one of my TikTok videos. They were like, "Ugh, I'm sitting over here waiting for you to write a book. Haha." And I was like, oh my God, wait a second. I've never thought about that. And so I pitched some agents and then we pitched some publishers. And, last winter, I was blessed with a book deal. And I literally just sent out my manuscript 2 days ago. And so that'll be in bookstores in 2024, which is so far away. So for now, women can find everything at betterfemalefriendships.com.
Love that. Thank you so much again for your time and everything. It was just wonderful to meet you.
Thank you for having me.